Welcome back, Honors. Oh, geez. It's about, what time is it? It's about 6:50 in the morning right now. Trying to go ahead and bang one of these flips out. So, today in class, what we're going to be talking about, because I haven't had you yet, but what we're going to get to is we're talking about the fun guys out of the two of these big groups, right? When you're talking about, like, the differences between the Spartans and the Athenians, right? The Spartans are always a little more fun to talk about. Just due to the fact that, like, you know, going off to, like, train for war at the age of 7. You know, like, going off and, like, being encouraged to steal, right? Be their hard-course regiment, what the food that they were given, right? All that stuff is really neat. However, do not sleep on the Athenians, right? Don't sleep on the Athenians just because they contributed a lot of amazing practices that we still use, right? So, for example, their government system more than anything else, their educational systems, a lot of different things. Right here, we're looking again at the Acropolis of Athens. This right here, the Parthenon, very, very, very important building. One of the main vestiges of extreme, like, Greek architecture that still exists in the world, right? I know there's something crazy, too, about the Parthenon, but I can never quite remember what it is. That, like, the walls don't go straight, but they look straight or something like that. I don't know. I'm going to have to look it up again and tell you about it later on. But it is an amazing, amazing, amazing place. I haven't been yet. Notice I said yet. So hopefully, though, soon enough. Now, the main thing, though, is all about their rule, right? So first of all, let's talk about how culturally, there was going to be some rifts between them and the Spartans out the gate, right? Out the gate before, like, war or, like any kind of real animosity began. The Athenians claimed that they were settled by the Ionians, right? Well, remember how we talked about, like, for a brief moment, we were like, oh, well, Homer wrote the Iliad and the Odyssey about the Trojan War. Right? And then we talked about how, like, Virgil was a Roman poet who wrote the Aeneid, which was about the settlement of Rome, because it was like a fad thing to say that you were settled by the Trojans, right? At one time, it was a romantic telling of being settled by the Trojans, right? So the thing about it is, were the Athenians settled by the Ionians? Maybe. Right? But there's also a chance that they were settled by the Dorians as well, due to the fact that their proximity to the Spartans, right? Now, the other big thing about it is that kind of just sets up some cultural beef, right? Due to the fact that the Athenians believed they were settled by the Ionians, not the Dorians, right? Not the barbarians that had a hand in the Bronze Age collapse, but by the Ionians, okay? So the big thing about Athens is they didn't start out as the democratic, like, wherewithal, great government that we always believe, like, that you're always taught that they did, right? They actually started out as an aristocracy. Now, an aristocracy, it's a very important word, like, put a, like, star next to it or whatever, which is when wealthy landowners are actually in charge, right? So, mainly from specific families. At the onset of the Athenian era, there were actually 4 families that controlled the entire region, right? So, and as they died, they would pass that on to one of their younger children, right? And it was kind of a hierarchical scheme. Now, the problem is that, yes, wealth will grow extremely fast, but mainly among the upper class, right? So there was a large gap in Athens between the wealthy and the poor as it began to actually develop. Whereas in Sparta, they didn't even care about wealth and poor. They really cared much more about, what am I looking for? Cared much more about, like, militaristic status, right? They cared more about dying in battle was better than dying, like, in a government chair. And did the Spartans have government officials? Yes, okay? They weren't, every single one of them weren't, like, you know what I mean. We're going to talk about it today. You'll see. Now, anyway, so. But what the Athenians are going to do is they're going to begin to pull in a lot of smaller Greek settlements and form one big, bad city-state known as Athens, right? Now, the Athenians, to me, are defined as just being very, very extra in the early onset, right? They did a lot of things that they didn't necessarily need to, but it was really, really important. But this guy is probably, there are 2 Athenians that are super, super famous. Do I think that this guy belongs on Mr. Terry's ranking of the 5 most important people in history? Maybe not necessarily. The guy that comes after him, though, definitely. He's like number 3. All right, anyway, now, but Solon, right? Solon would have actually changed government forever. He was from one of those 4 famous families among the aristocracy of the Athenians, right? So he was actually appointed chief official in 594 BC, okay? Considered the father of modern-day government, right? The father of modern-day government. Because he's going to do 2 things. He is going to outlaw debt slavery, which was a very, very big thing. And he's also going to push for fairer voting, and he's also going to drive it completely away from the aristocracy and push Athens towards a democratic system where they actually choose their leader, where the people choose their leader, and that leader would be called anybody know? Oh, no, happens to the best of us. It's called an archon, right? A-R-C-H-O-N, an archon, right? So, but he's going to outlaw debt slavery, which is a really, really big one, okay? Because debt slavery was just an old vestige of how the aristocracy used to exact control over the lower classes, okay? So every time that the lower class could, if let's say hypothetically Michael was in debt slavery to, Rivera, right? Rivera, Michael is in debt slavery because he borrowed $6. Well, as Rivera actually gives him certain supplies to use in the old Athenian way before Solon, Michael would just keep getting further and further into debt. He would never actually be able to get out of it, okay? So, it was a very, very unfair system, and it was just an old way of showing that the rich were better than the poor. Solon's going to try and get rid of that. He's going to outlaw debt slavery, push Athenians toward democracy. Very, very important figure. He also has a very sweet beard, right? So we've talked about several key Greek figures already. Homer, Hesiod, Solon, Leonidas, right? We will talk about here in a little bit. So a lot of different figures, right? Now, continuing forward, though, they also created legislative systems, right? So the Athenians are going to create civil councils of elected officials, right? They're going to create voting. Actually, fun fact about the voting processes in Athens, when they created voting, it was actually just a very rudimentary system of rocks, right? So there would actually be a large clay pot, and they would actually have different colored rocks. So hypothetically, let's say Magrino was running against, let me try and think. Who's Magrino going to run against? She's running against, Hobbs. Who's keying into my door right now? Who is that? How did you have a key? Oh, I thought that was a kid. What's up, Mr. Wallace? So let's say hypothetically Magrino is running against. Oh, I'm recording. What? See what? Let's say Magrino is running against. Who are you running against? Who would be fair? Christian, right? Christian and Magrino are running against each other in this ancient Athenian democratic system. Well, Magrino would have a big pile of white rocks, and then Christian would have a big pile of black rocks. And whenever anybody wanted to choose who to vote for, they would walk up to the specific color rock and then drop it in the pot, and then they break the pot open, and then just count up the votes. It's a very, very, very smart system. Very, very intricate, or not intricate, very, very rudimentary, but neat system, right? So democracy, though, just so you have a heads up, is a rule by representative bodies, chosen usually by a vote, okay? So, or chosen by elected officials. So now, only land-owning male citizens, though, can participate in the government. Are you already starting to see a little rift between the Spartans and the Athenians? Yeah, it's the big one's all about how they treat women, right? So, Athenian women, rough goings, rough time in society, right? So, for example, they could not participate in politics. They run the house, but they're also the only time that you would ever see a woman outside of their homes in the forefront of society was for religious ceremonies, right? And there were tons of different religious ceremonies, like the axe one that Del Rey was talking about, right? So, we're going to put this axe on trial. Is it just an axe, or is it an evil axe? Anyway, but women had much more freedom in Sparta. One of the only places where women were actually allowed to go without asking permission from a man first was actually to local wells, right? So they would be allowed to go to local wells where they could actually meet up, and then they would actually gather water for the day, right? So this is actually a black figure pot from the Archaic period in Greece showing women collecting water for the day. Now, the other big thing about Athenian women is that men were allowed to keep multiple concubines, were allowed to have multiple wives, were allowed to have crazy other little things about women as well. Women and men did not sleep in the same bedroom in Athens, right? And we're going to talk about how that led to some social inequalities later on. They actually slept in 2 separate rooms. So I'll show you the makeup of an Athenian home a little bit later on. But education. Really, really big one. And this here is a red figure pottery. Yeah. All right, so what do you see going on in this red figure pottery? Anybody? Anybody? Well, yeah, it's their education, right? So they're like their schooling. So you see reading, writing, music is another big part of it, right? Probably learning poetry, math. This right here, what he's playing, is not a harp, just to give you a heads up, all right? It's a lyre, right? A lyre. I think it's spelled L-Y-R-E. I could be wrong, but I think it's spelled L-Y-R-E. Now, a lyre is also called a lap harp, all right? So, like, it's actually like it's a stringed instrument that they would learn to play. They also played a two-fluted instrument that I can never remember what it's called. It's got, like, two flutes coming off the end of it like that. And so, anyway, but continuing forward. Boys are going to attend schools if the family can afford it, okay? So, again, even after Solon and after his reforms, you can see there's still some inequalities between the wealthy and the poor of Athens, right? So, they're going to learn to read, write, study music, memorize poetry. Big one, though, public speaking. And during the warm-up tomorrow, I'm going to ask y'all, why do you think public speaking was an important education subject in Athens, right? So, and they're going to receive some, but very little military training. And that's where we're going to stop, right? So the Athenians were remembered for their education, their government, just kind of like other parts of their society, a gap between the wealthy and the poor. Growing economy, that's a big part of the Athenian era. Whereas the Spartans are remembered for their militaristic style, right? So we'll talk more about the Athenians tomorrow. I'll give you some other fun facts and stuff like that. But I wanted to be able to kind of just like go over the base in this flip. And as you can see, the sun's coming up. Y'all are fixing to probably walk in soon. It's about 7:10 now. So I guess I'll see y'all tomorrow. All right, so y'all have a good one. See you later on.